Hey, welcome back everybody. Today I'm going to talk to you about a big block and a small block. I've got a couple questions recently about what is a big block and what is a small block. This is a small block Chevy. It's a 350 cubic inch engine. It's got a 4-inch bore, and this is their typical small block engine that they run. Been making this design engine since 1955. This is a 4-bolt main engine. That means the main caps have 4-bolt mains, pretty typical of a 350 Chevy. This big guy here, is a big block Chevy. It's got 2-bolt mains, however they do come with 4-bolt caps. This is a 2-bolt version, and you can see the difference. It's a much larger engine. The difference between a big block and a small block is the big block is big and the small block is small, or smaller I should say. If you look at the bores here, you can see the big block has quite a bit bigger of a bore. So what determines whether or not an engine is a big block or small block? Well, it's simple. The engineers who created them. Not all manufacturers and not all of the older V8s were made in big block and small block versions. For instance, Pontiac, they don't have a big block or a small block. All their engines, from the smallest all the way up to the biggest cubic inches, are the same size. So, you can see the difference here. The big block is quite a bit bigger than the small block, and the weight difference is significant too. So it was simply a matter of the engineers deciding one was big and one was small. Small block Chevy heads next to a big block Chevy head, you can really see the difference here. This is a typical small block 350, 327 head. They're all pretty much the same size. These heads had valves that were in line. All of the valves were in a straight line across the head, and they had a wedge type combustion chamber. The valves, they had pretty good sized valves in them. Of course, not as big as the big blocks did. But if you look at the valves, they're all the valve guides are in a straight line with each other. They're on the same plane. So they're a bit inclined from the vertical portion of the head, but nevertheless they are in line. The big block is a different story. The big block Chevrolet, and this is one of the keys to the power of this engine, has what we call a canted valve. A canted valve means that the valve is laid over toward the port. You can see it's a much larger head. You can really see the contrast between big and small block here when you compare these heads. The valves, the exhaust valves, are in line and laid over toward the exhaust port, and then the intake valves are in line and they are laid over toward the intake port. So the valves are at kind of a strange angle, but what they did by laying these valves over toward the port is they gave the head much better flow characteristics, plus you can fit a bigger valve in there. So the big block Chevy is definitely exactly what the name means. It's just a bigger block. Now that's not to say that the cubic inches is necessarily bigger, because Chevrolet, and there's your canted valve there, it's laid over toward the port. Chevrolet has a 396 cubic inch big block, and they have a 400 cubic inch small block. So they actually have a small block that has bigger cubic inches than one of their big blocks, although the physical dimensions of the block are one's big and one's small. If you look at the ports here, the Chevrolet has a square type port, the small block has a square port, and then the big block has oval ports. These are actually the smallest oval ports they have on these heads. The intake ports, you can see there's quite a difference here. Much bigger port on the exhaust side rather of each head. So basically what it comes down to is what determines a small block and a big block? Well, that is up to the engineers that made it. Chevrolet engineers, they made their small block engine, and then they call it a small block. Now what we have in here is we have a 4.3 liter Chevy. This is the Chevy V6, which is very similar to the small block head. In fact, it's basically a small block Chevrolet head that has one cylinder kind of chopped off of it. So they basically just took 2 cylinders away and they kept the design the same. So the 4.3 liter Chevy, very similar to the small block. What I would like to see is them make a V6 based on the big block. You know, they actually did that. They made a V6 based on, I believe, the 409. They made a 305 cubic inch V6 back in the 60s, and it had these big massive heads on it. It was basically a truck engine. In fact, they even coupled those engines together and made a V12 for some of the bigger trucks. Pretty interesting engine. Look up Chevy V12 sometime if you want to. There's a little 4.3 liter V6 we've got here. You can see how it's basically the same design as that small block 350, but it's like they just lopped 2 cylinders off of it, and so it's just a shorter version of that small block. This is a big block Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile doesn't have a big block and a small block, so they're all pretty much the same size. That's a 455 there. So hopefully that answers your question. Make sure you subscribe to my channel below, My Vintage Iron 7512, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Till next time, thanks for watching, and see you soon.